public radio program, Studio 360, and author of the best-selling book, Fantasyland, How America Went Haywire. Kurt Anderson joins us. Also with us, executive chairman of the online gaming company WinView, and CNBC founder and contributor Tom Rogers. He's out this morning with a new piece in the Morning Consult entitled Rebalancing the Senate, and we'll get to that in just a moment. But first, you know, Kurt, it's these numbers on the Biden versus the Trump story. They kind of describe the media landscape right now in terms of what people are hearing and what people are tuning out to, and perhaps even what this president has done sort of to the value of news. Does that make sense?
Well, I don't know about the value of news, but the value of what would in any normal time be a shocking allegation against the President of the United States. We are, all of us, inured to it, and therefore... Yes. Like, it comes and goes. The 15% number, frankly, does surprise me, that few, that small of a number of Americans are aware that the president is credibly accused of raping someone. Yes, that surprises me.
And Kurt, really? I mean, if you look at, sometimes it's worth pausing and saying, we have a president of the United States who is credibly accused with documentation of paying off a porn star. That came out right before the election. We learned more details about it later, but again, that just breezes past people. Well,
he has. I mean, it is the thing that is brought up again and again that he said, I could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and my people would still be with me, which was a brilliant insight, not only to the fervency of his base and the people who love him no matter what dear leader does, but that I have been accused so much, I'm such a rotten guy, I'm such a liar, I'm such a whatever, that one more, what's it going to do? Right. He understands that.
Baked in the cake.
Correct. It's baked in, it's discounted for. It's in the stock price.
And he counts on that. Tom, let's talk about your new piece. You offer a solution to the representation problem you argue the Senate currently faces. Tom writes, in part, in order to reverse a number of Trump's initiatives, it's clear that it's not enough to win back the presidency. Democrats need to control Congress as well. Winning the Senate becomes key, but is that possible? The Founding Fathers devised the Senate to ensure each state had equal representation, and the House had the number of elected officials proportionate to population. However, a massive population imbalance across the country has developed over time. However, there is a remedy that could be accomplished quite rapidly if the Democrats do regain control of the executive and legislative branches. There are about 4 million U.S. citizens living in Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico currently being deprived of voting representation in Congress. In 2020, put the right to at the top of the ticket, take 2 houses of Congress and 2 branches of government, and admit 2 new states. So let's focus on the Senate, too. That's one of the things, Tom, we've been talking about here, which is all these proposals we hear in the Democratic debate, they're pure fantasy if Democrats don't also take back the Senate.
Absolutely right. And the issue of the Senate being out of whack with the U.S. population has become really dramatic. When the founders created the Senate with 2 senators from each state, the difference between the 5 most populous northern states and the 5 least populous southern states was 700,000 people, or a total population ratio of about 2 to 1. That has grown today so that the 10 most populous blue states versus the 10 least populous red states is a delta in terms of population of 91 million people, or a ratio of 24 to 1. And when you really break that down, what that has happening is you have 20 red states sending 40 United States senators to the Senate, where there are only about 5% of the U.S. population that votes Republican in those states, effectively sending a controlling bloc to the U.S. Senate. Now, you can't get a constitutional amendment through. We've talked about on this show before rebalancing the U.S. Supreme Court and how you can do that without a constitutional amendment. Admitting states can be done by a majority of Congress. By tradition, there's a plebiscite in each of the territories that would be admitted. Both Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico have done that. Majorities have spoken. They want to be admitted. And a majority of the Congress, if we regain the presidency in both houses of Congress, could admit 2 states, which would probably result in 4 new Democratic senators and begin to rebalance an incredibly out-of-whack Senate relative to only 5% of the U.S. population voting and effectively having a controlling bloc over body altogether.
Gene Robinson. Gene, hop in here.
Well, you know, I think that's a good idea just because we have taxation without representation in the District of Columbia and in Puerto Rico. I mean, it's what the American Revolution was fought over, and it's an injustice, and it ought to be corrected. It would also help rebalance the Senate. But in order to do that, Democrats would have to take the Senate. And so shouldn't some of these presidential candidates be running for the Senate? Some who could win Senate seats, like Steve Bullock in Montana, like John Hickenlooper in Colorado, like Beto O'Rourke potentially in Texas. They're likely not going to be president, but they'd have a better chance of becoming a senator and actually helping Democrats win a majority, wouldn't they?
You make a great point, because it looks as if only 6 Republican seats, even though there are 22 Republican seats up in 2020, only 6 are in play, and maybe only 4 in play. And if the Democrats lose Alabama, which is certainly a possibility, even if they gain the presidency and the vice president can break a tie in a 50-50 Senate, they'd have to take all 4 of those seats that are most in play. So that looks like a tougher climb than taking the presidency, actually, but fundamental not only in terms of making change, but rebalancing a branch of government that is fully out of whack.
You know, Kurt, do you think it's possible that when the history of this political era, say the last 10, 15, 20 years, is written, that Donald Trump will certainly be a pivotal figure in the course of writing this history? But what about the prospect of Mitch McConnell being a more pivotal figure, given what he's done to increase and heighten the polarization of this nation through the United States Senate?
I think he'll still be a less well-known freakish figure in our history than the president. However, but the Merrick Garland incident, that episode, it seems to me it will be seen forever as a milestone in breaking of the norms, and doing this thing that certainly our descendants, I think, will look at as this hardball beyond hardball in terms of depriving us of the normal democratic functioning, as small d, as it had been working for decades.
And speaking of McConnell, the population of Kentucky is about 4 million people. The combined population of Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C. is about 4 million people. Puerto Rico, in fact, has a higher population than 21 states in the country. And not only in terms of minority representation of blacks and Latinos, who are clearly underrepresented in the political process, the victims of voter suppression more than anybody else, the gerrymandering decision of the U.S. Supreme Court, obviously further compounding that issue. This would be an indirect remedy for a lot of that, not to mention the humanitarian issues of how Puerto Ricans were treated as second-class citizens, and making them a state would go a long way probably in rectifying that so it doesn't happen again in the future.
So, Tom, just for the benefit of our viewers, you're not arguing that Montana and South Dakota should have fewer senators. You just believe other places should have representation.
You can't change the basic constitutional principles that are laid out, and trying to do so would be folly. This is simply a way of doing something that we do every 50 or 60 years. 60 years ago, we admitted Hawaii and Alaska. They had about 1/5 the combined population of Puerto Rico and D.C. today. 50 years before that, we admitted New Mexico and Arizona. So every 50, 60 years, we do this. It's about time, and we need to do it, given how out of whack Senate control has become in the small hands of a very tiny percentage of U.S. voters.
So, Mike Barnacle, it's not hard to remember when Kentucky went Democratic. It certainly used to be a Democratic state, but Bill Clinton, even in 1996, carried the state of Kentucky. Arkansas, Kentucky. I mean, you could go up the entire Mississippi River, Missouri. I mean, that's not ancient history, and I don't know that population trends have changed quite so much. But again, Clinton carried Kentucky. We're hearing it's unwinnable now. I don't know. There seems to be a lot of things happening at the same time.
You know what was interesting when Amy McGrath was on with us a few moments ago, Joe, and you pointed this out. She made it a point to indicate that she was not in favor of Medicare for all, things like that, that pose a lethal threat to Democratic candidates in some states. And she seems to be focusing in on one of the not often mentioned aspects of campaigning in this country today, the importance of family income. I mean, if you focus on family income, raising family income in places like Paducah, Kentucky, or Portland, Maine, I don't care where you're talking about it, that's going to resonate with voters much more so, I think, than Medicare for All, issues like that. It's what are you going to do to help my family grow, to help my income grow? I mean, Steve's charts showed that that would resonate all throughout the country.
But Joe,
Yeah, and you look, Mika. Oh, go ahead.
Joe, I was just going to say, to your point, you can look at certain states which could turn back. Montana, for instance, which is considered a very red state, is one of 9 states that has 1 Democratic and 1 Republican senator. If Bullock was not going to run for presidency and instead take on Daines for the Senate there, there'd be a really good chance that a really red state might end up with 2 Democratic senators, and you could begin to see some of this change by virtue of the electorate. But it looks like a pretty tough climb for the Democrats in 2020, given what's really in play now and the candidates that have come forward.
Well, a tough climb unless, as you say, Bullock runs for senator there.
Yeah.
Hickenlooper runs for senator in Colorado. Beto, if he decides at some point to get out of the presidential race, runs for senator in Texas. Suddenly you have 3 very red states that are toss-ups, and it changes the map for everybody.
We need these Democrats.
Stacey Abrams in Georgia, Sally Yates in Georgia also. But those candidates are not coming forward, and the Democratic Party needs to do something about that.
Yeah.
All right, Kurt Anderson, thank you. Tom Rogers, thank you. Great to see you. We'll be reading your new piece for the Morning Consult. And up next, President Trump fires back at the UK's ambassador to the U.S., who called Trump, quote, inept, insecure, and incompetent. The retribution the White House took yesterday over the